Today we're going to start a three-piece series of reviews of Zeiss portrait lenses. Now the first review that we are going to do is on this lens. This is the Otus 55mm 1.4, announced 2 years ago. The second review that we are going to do is going to be on the new 85mm Otus review released earlier this year, and the third review that we are going to do in this series, the final one, is going to be on the 135mm f2 lens by Zeiss. So these are the three portrait lenses that we are going to test. There are the best portrait lenses that Zeiss is currently manufacturing, and they're going to be very, very interesting for us to review. Now, this is the 55mm, as we said. This lens was announced a little bit after Photokina. The prototype of this lens was demonstrated on Photokina 2012. And we had a chance to play with it a bit, with the prototype, and talk to a Zeiss representative on the show who told us a bit about the lens and the rationale behind actually creating this lens for the first time. The idea was to create the best portrait lens available at a 50 or 50-ish millimeter focal length. The idea was to do a lens which has basically no limitations. So this lens is very big, it's very heavy. We're going to talk about the build quality and the design a little bit later. But the idea was to create the best performance without consideration, or without a lot of consideration, for the size and weight of the lens. So it's big, it's heavy, it's quite expensive. But the image quality, as we will see in a short while, is the best on its class and the best in its class. So this is the 55mm Otus. What we are going to do now is, as we said, talk a little bit about the build quality, the design. Later on, we are going to talk about focusing with this lens. Now, all three lenses are manual focus only lenses. And this is something that brings with it all sorts of considerations and all sorts of difficulties, as we are going to see when used on a DSLR. We have used on all three reviews, we have used the D800 and our D7100. The D800 is obviously a full frame camera. The D7100 is a crop camera. This is the Nikon version. All three lenses were Nikon versions. Now, this lens and the second Otus lens were both designed, and this is something that Zeiss told us when they talked to us on Photokina, was specifically designed for very high resolution DSLRs. Now, the idea is to create the best image quality for very high resolution sensors. Now, the D800, as you probably know, has a 36 megapixel sensor. And we are expecting next year, in 2015, to see even higher resolution cameras available on the market. And again, this lens and the 85 are going to be the best performing lenses on the market for these type of cameras. So let's move on and talk a bit about the build quality and the design of the Otus 55mm lens. As you can see, this lens is very unique in terms of its design. It's very different than any other lens from any other manufacturer. First of all the markings are here in yellow, so this is the trademark of the Otus lens series. We will see this again in the 85mm version. The lens itself is very big. Now, if we compare this, we happen to have here now with us the 56mm lens 1.2 lens from Fujifilm, and if you can see, even with the X-T1, it's still taller and in some respects larger. So this is a huge lens. Of course, this is not a fair comparison because the 56mm is an APS-C lens and this is a full frame lens. But still, this is a very large lens, and even if you compare it to the latest Sigma 50mm lens, the 1.4, it's still much larger, and obviously larger than any other comparable lens from Canon or Nikon. So it's very large. Now, in terms of actual measurements, this is just over 1 kilogram, and not a very light lens. It's 144 millimeter in length. So if we remove the hood, The length of the lens is 144 millimeter. In terms of width, this is 92 millimeters, and the filter thread is 77 millimeters. Now, the construction of the lens, or the elements that you can find if you were to open the lens, the lens is made of 12 elements in 10 groups, including 6 lens elements with anomalous partial dispersion and one double-sided aspheric element. So it's a very complex lens design in terms of what Zeiss built into this lens. The minimum focus distance is 50 centimeters, and the maximum magnification is 1 to 6.8, so it's not a macro lens. Now, the body itself is all metal, as you can see, apart of course from the focus ring, which we will talk about in a second. The hood itself is also metal, and what we are going to show you is how to actually connect it. You have here a yellow marking, and you have a yellow marking here, and you have to align them, twist it, and then it locks into position. So this is how it works. Otherwise, you're going to mess with it for a long time. So this is in terms of the hood. The hood itself also has a fabric inside to prevent all sorts of light coming and reflecting from the inside of the hood into the lens itself. So this is another trademark of the Zeiss line of lenses. So this is in terms of the hood. Now let's get back to the lens itself. The lens has a focus ring which turns 245 degrees. So if we will look, this is where it begins, about 0.5 meters, which is the minimum focus distance, and you can turn it, and turn it, and turn it, and turn it, turn it, until you reach infinity. So this is 245 degrees of turn. This is very, very sensitive. Believe us, even the slightest change to the focus ring is something that you're going to feel in your images, and we have seen that, and shooting with live view is something that is really helpful in this respect. We're going to talk about focusing with this lens later on. Now, in terms of the other ring that we have here, this is the aperture ring. So as you can see, it's down below, also marked in yellow, 1.4 to f16, and it has this small button here, as you can see. You turn it, and as you can see, it moves and clicks. So this is definitely not a lens which was designed specifically for use for video work, but you can shoot with it. All the other videos that we have shot in this series were shot with this lens, so you can see the image quality, which is superb. It's just if you're planning on using this with a follow focus, this ring is probably not the best, and again, the aperture ring clicks, so if you're going to change the aperture during shooting, not the best idea. So this is in terms of the aperture ring and the focus ring. All in all, the build quality is really, really superb, exactly what we would expect from a lens at this price point and a lens from Zeiss. What we're going to talk about now are the challenges of using manual focus lenses with DSLR cameras. Now, Zeiss published an article on their website describing some of the ways in which you can actually do manual focus with DSLRs. Now, it's a complex task, but there are at least 3 ways which this can be achieved. The first way is using the focus indicator in the viewfinder to actually pinpoint the focus. What we have discovered is that, at least on the cameras that we have used, which is the D800 and the D7100, the focus indicator, the dot inside the viewfinder which you see when you do focus, is not accurate enough for use with this type of manual focus lenses. Now, as you know, you have either a right arrow or a left arrow, which tells you where to focus the lens, where to turn the lens when you're focusing. And the dot is either blinking or is solid. When it's solid, you're supposed to be in focus. What we have discovered is that even when the dot is solid, you're not in 100% focus. And you look at the image later on the screen or on the computer, you figure out that a lot of times when the dot is completely solid, you still get a focus which is not perfect. So this is a problem. So what you can actually do is use, and this is the recommendation by Zeiss, use a focusing screen. Focusing screen needs to be put inside the camera, so this is a process. Most people don't do this themselves. They either send the camera to a lab or a repair shop or something of that sort, and they actually put the focusing screen inside the camera. Once you put it inside, it's much more convenient to use. This is something that was used quite extensively in the analog days. We had a chance to use a D800 with a focusing screen on Photokina 2012 with the 135mm Zeiss lens, and it was really useful. We were able to pinpoint the focus, and when we looked at the images later on in full magnification on the screen, we saw that the focus was really precise. So this is a very useful tool. The problem with this is, first, you need to actually install this inside your camera, and second of all, if you're actually using this, both manual focus and autofocus lenses, with your camera, the focusing screen might hinder you, might make your life more difficult with the autofocus. So it's a problem. It's not the perfect solution. If you're using only manual focus lenses, the focusing screen is a great idea. Now, the third option, which is what we have used on our test with this lens and the two other that we used, is live view. Now, when using live view, you typically put the camera on a tripod, like we are doing right now, and using the live view with the magnification of the camera. Now, when using this sort of method, you can get very, very precise images, and practically almost all the images that we're going to show you later on were shot in this method. Now, the problem with this is, of course, that you're restricted to actually working with a tripod. You're fixed in one place. So this is not a very convenient way to work if you're trying to shoot moving objects and things like that. We were able, however, to shoot even in a live concert, which is a very difficult place to shoot. We were pretty close. It was a small concert, and we were able to shoot the performer. You will see the images later on in the video with live view and a tripod. It was not easy. We had a lot of misses, but at least some of the images were very, very sharp. As you can see, this lens we're going to talk a bit about in the later section about the performance of this lens and the sharpness that you can get from it was very good, but it was hard. It is a difficult task. Now, another thing that you have to keep in mind when using a live view on this on a DSLR with a manual focus lens is that you always lose when you get inside, when you get to 100%, you always lose the composition, and this is a problem. On mirrorless cameras, you have the ability, at least for example on the Fuji, the X-T1, you can see a full image, and then on the side you can see the magnification, just the focus magnification where you're focusing. On DSLRs, at least all the DSLRs that we have used, you only see the full image, or when you get into 100% magnification, you see just the point where you are focusing. So this is a problem. You have to get inside and get outside. This makes your life much harder. If you're focusing on a stationary subject like a product or something like that, it's not a problem because it's not moving. But if you're focusing on a model, this might be a problem even if she or he is moving just very, very slightly in the frame, because you're always losing the exact composition that you like. So this is a problem. So these are the three methods. As we said, we use live view. If you're shooting stationary or semi-stationary object, this is okay. If you're shooting moving object, this might be harder. We have a short video that we recorded earlier showing exactly how we actually do the manual focus with the live view on a tripod, and we're going to see it right now. What we wanted to demonstrate right now is how we actually focus with the live view on the D800. Now we are in 1.4 with the lens, f1.4, and what we were going to show you is how to use it. We're basically on a tripod, and we're zooming inside into the image. As you can see, as we're zooming in, you lose the entire composition of the image. So this is a problem with the DSLRs. On some mirrorless cameras, you still have the entire image, and only a fraction of the image is zoomed in, and you can see the focus area. You don't have this here, so you're losing the entire composition. Now we're trying to focus, and as you can see, we have a lot of room to move the lens. Here we go. So we reached more or less perfect focus, and we're taking an image. Now we are zooming in. So in this way, you can actually zoom and create critical focus with the Otus 55mm. It's not perfect because a lot of cases you are not able to use a tripod, or it's limiting, but otherwise you can get very, very sharp images. What we want to talk about now is the performance of the Zeiss Otus 55mm lens. Now, what we have discovered, we did a lot of testing, and we discovered that across the board, this lens is probably the best optically performing lens that we have ever tested. Now, the first thing that we have tested is the sharpness of the lens. Now, we tested it wide open across the entire frame. We used the D800, and we shot a few objects which were placed across the frame. You can see it now on the screen. We tested first in 1.4. And as you can see, the image is very, very sharp. In the center, it's super sharp, and in the edges, it's slightly less sharp, but still very, very sharp. When we closed down to 2.8, the edges, the center was still about the same image quality. The edges were slightly more sharp, but the difference is not very big. When we closed to f8, we gained a slight more advantage, more sharpness in the edges, but at the end of the day, the sharpness in the edges didn't change much when moving from 1.4 to f8. So the image quality, the sharpness is superb, even wide open, and this is exactly what Zeiss was planning now on doing with this lens. Now, the second thing is detail. And in a few seconds, we're going to show you a list of images, or a few images that we shot with this camera, and you can see the amount of detail that this lens can actually produce. It's not just the detail, it's also the contrast of this lens, which is very, very high. Now, in terms of other features or other factors that has to do with the optical quality of the lens, we didn't see almost any vignette when using this. We shot the sky at both f1.4 and f8, and you can see the images. You don't see a lot of difference. We also didn't see any barrel distortion, so this lens is very uniform in terms of the quality of the diagonal that you're actually going to get. We didn't find any chromatic aberration. There might be some, but we didn't see any in any of the images that we actually shot with it. Another thing that we found out is that this lens is very susceptible, or actually very being able to actually handle flare very, very well. So even when we shot right into the sun, or very close to shooting directly into the sun, you do not see a lot of veiling flare with this lens, which is great. It's really surprised us the amount of the ability of this lens to handle this type of problem. So what we're going to show you now, you can already see this on the screen, are some of the images that we shot with this lens. We mostly shot portraits because we think that this lens is made for shooting portraits. You can shoot product photography with it as long as you don't need macro photography, because this is not a macro lens as we discussed previously. But for portraits, it's amazing, especially, of course, if your subject is willing to stay at one place and let you play with the focus. So this is what we have done with it. We're really pleased with the image quality. This is, of course, the strongest point of this lens and the big selling point of the Otus 55mm. So let's go on and conclude this review. So let's sum this review of the Zeiss Otus 55mm 1.4. Now, we really enjoyed using this lens. We specifically enjoyed the super high image quality this lens can actually provide. Now, it was a challenge to use the autofocus, but when we were able to actually pinpoint the focus, we got really superb results. So this is the first thing that we really like about this lens. The second thing that we liked is the build quality. And not just the build quality, which is really, really good, we also like the design of the Otus line. This is true for this lens and the new 85mm. What's really nice about it is, first of all, the rubber grip, which is a very interesting solution for doing focus, or for doing a focus ring on a lens. It's very different than any other lens that we know of. The second thing is that the hood of the lens is metal, and it looks like it is part of the lens itself. So it's a very nice piece, a very nice design that Zeiss was able to create, as you can see. So the design and the build quality is really, really good. So this is the second thing. All in all, this lens is very nice to handle. Image quality is superb, and it's really cool. Now, what we didn't like about this lens, now there are not a lot of things, but obviously it's very big and bulky. It's a large lens, especially if you're thinking about a 55mm lens. So it's not small, it's the largest of its kind. Even the Sigma 50mm lens, which is slightly newer than this one, is a bit smaller than the Otus. It's not much lighter. It's about 800 and something grams versus about a kilogram of this lens. So it's not a huge difference, but both of them are very heavy. So another thing to take in mind, it's not weather sealed. So this is a bit strange. We're not sure why Zeiss decided not to make this lens weather sealed. Maybe something to do with the rubber design, we don't know. Another thing which was, as we said, challenging was using the manual focus. Now, the ring itself is very, very good. You are able to do very precise focusing with this ring. But for general use, using manual focus lens on DSLR cameras, as we discussed, is something of a challenge. So it's not very simple. And finally, it's an expensive lens. Obviously it's not a very cheap one. It's about $4,500. Now, who is this lens made for? And this is where we are going to talk both about the financial aspect, or the cost of this lens, and why we think that this is not really an issue for the target audience, and also who actually needs this. I mean, it's huge, it's heavy, and it's pretty expensive, but you do get a lot of image quality. Now, we see two typical target audience for this lens. The first are studio photographers. Studio photographers, product photographers, people who are looking for the best image quality possible on DSLRs. Now, the reason why we think this lens is actually not that expensive is that those people are actually, at least some of them, are currently thinking about going medium format or are currently using medium format and like to use DSLRs because they want more versatility with their camera, with their gear. Medium format, even the new CMOS sensor medium format cameras are not very flexible. They're very one type of photography, if you like, kind of tool. Their focus mechanism is not very flexible. You have one autofocus point. They're not very useful tools for shooting all sorts of photography. If you're using a D800, D810, these sorts of cameras can shoot more or less anything. So you can switch between this type of lens and autofocus lens and shoot whatever you want. So shooting with DSLRs, 35mm DSLRs, is possibly a better option for these types of photographers, and if they're using the Otus, they can actually achieve a level of detail and level of sharpness that is very close to what they'll be able to get with a medium format, despite of course the smaller sensor. So for them, buying $4,500 lens is not that expensive, because if you're thinking about medium format, which cost $10,000, it's not that expensive. Even if you consider the price of the camera, you're talking $6,000 or something like that, $7,000. So this is one target audience. The second possible target audience for this lens are people who love to shoot with manual focus lenses. Either they're shooting with SLRs, there are still people using older SLRs, or they're shooting with DSLRs, but they're very keen to using manual focus lenses. Either they shot with them in the past, or they simply like it. And for them, this is a top of the line lens but from any brand, at least from our experience. So these are the two target audience that we see for this lens. Shooting, if you're a sports photographer or a photojournalist, we're not sure that this lens is the right tool for you, but otherwise, this is possibly the best 50-50 or 50-ish millimeter lens on the market right now. Be sure to watch our two following videos of the 85mm Otus and the 135mm Zeiss f2 lens later on. And if you want to see more, be sure to read the full review on LensVid.com.